Well, guys, we're going to start reading our book, Benjamin Franklin. At the time when the King of England ruled over the American colonies, there stood a small house on Milk Street in Boston. In this house, there lived a candle maker whose name was Josiah Franklin. He was a good and pious man, and the Lord had given him a virtuous wife and a blessing of 17 children. Wow. All counted. 3 times each Sunday, he led all his children to church, and he taught them to be honest and hardworking and satisfied with little. He who knows his trade does not have to stand except for kings, said Josiah Franklin. He looked proudly at his 10 husky sons and hoped that someday they would all be good tradesmen. The youngest of his sons was Benjamin. He was born in 1706. He was different from his brothers. He was only knee-high to a grasshopper when he first learned to read, and he wondered and asked questions from morning until night. He was a merry little fellow with stocky legs and a bright mind, busy with flights of fancy and practical ideas. He thought it was a pity that his father, who was so busy working to keep them all in food and clothes, should waste so much time saying a long grace every time he ate. "Father," he said one day as they were sitting down to table, "think of all the time you could save if you would thank the Lord once and for all for the whole larder." Well, his father was pious and serious, but he could not help smiling. And when he told his friends what a clever young son he had, they laughed with him and agreed that Benjamin was so bright he might even become a minister. And on the next holiday, one of the friends filled Benjamin's little coat pocket with copper pennies. Benjamin had never had a penny of his own before, and joyfully he ran to the toy shop. He offered all his money for a whistle he had set his heart on. He ran home and marched through the house, shrilly blowing it while the rest of the family stopped up their ears. And here's a picture of Benjamin blowing that whistle. When his sisters and his brothers found out that he had spent all of his pennies for a whistle, he was the one who stopped up his ears. They teased him and called him a spendthrift until he cried. He had spent 4 times as much at the whistle, 4 times as much as the whistle was worth. That was the only time Benjamin ever spent a penny unwisely. Benjamin lived near the sea, and he early learned to swim and to sail. He never grew tired of watching the wind carry the boats over the water, just as it carried his kite up into the sky. And one day, while he was swimming, he fastened the kite to himself as if it were a sail and he were a boat. It carried him gently over the water while his friends, who were kicking and splashing, looked on in astonishment. Because he had so many ideas like this, he was usually the leader among his playmates. Like any boy, he sometimes led them into mischief. And once he got all of his playmates together at the shore where they liked best to fish. The ground was swampy, but nearby Benjamin had found a big pile of stones that were used for building a house. He and his friends took these stones and built a fine wharf. But when the workmen came and found the stones gone, it helped Benjamin little to plead the usefulness of their work. After he had been soundly spanked by his father, Benjamin was convinced that nothing is useful that is not honest. When Benjamin was 8 years old, his father sent him to grammar school. He rose to the head of his class in reading and writing, and he read every book he could lay his hands on. but he was poor in math. His father began to think that perhaps Benjamin should be a tradesman like his brothers. So when Benjamin was 10 years old, he was taken out of school to learn his father's trade of candle making. Benjamin hated dipping candles and cutting wicks the whole day long. He read and he dreamed. More and more he dreamed about ships and voyages to faraway ports. His father began to fear that his son might become a sailor and be lost at sea. Hoping to find Benjamin a trade that he would really like, he took him to call on joiners and braziers and cutlers and bricklayers in their workshops. Benjamin learned much about these trades, but he did not want to follow any of them. At last, his worried father persuaded him that since he was so fond of books, he should become a printer's apprentice. Then he could look at the printed word all day long. His older brother James had a printing shop, and when Benjamin was 12 years old, he moved from his father's house and bound himself to be his brother's apprentice for 9 years. In return, James was to teach him to print and to give him his board and clothes. James was a strict master. When his young brother answered back with his quick wit and ready tongue, he boxed his ears severely. Benjamin had to sweep the floor, wash the type, and do all the dirty work while he watched his brother and his helpers print pamphlets. By and by, James taught him to set type and to print. Benjamin was a hard-working boy, and he learned fast. In a few years, he was his brother's best worker. He would have liked life in the printing shop very much if he had more time to read all the books around him. One day, he had one of his practical ideas. He asked his brother to give him half of the money he paid for Benjamin's board so he could get his own meals and eat them in the shop while others went out. James did not mind. He saved money, and Benjamin was happy. Now he had time to read books in peace while he ate his gruel and munched an apple. He did not care much what he ate as long as it was cheap and wholesome. He soon found that he could save half of the money his brother gave him for food. With that, he brought books. This concludes our reading for today. The story, as we begin, the story of Benjamin Franklin.